Professor Raymond was trained at the Sorbonne in Paris in art and archaeology, and she studied Burmese at the Institute of Oriental Languages and Civilizations, also in Paris, as well as studying Burmese in Myanmar itself for over a year. She is the director of the highly regarded Center for Burmese Studies at Northern Illinois University, the only such center in the U.S. She is the editor of the Journal of Burma Studies, the only journal that focuses specifically on Myanmar. Professor Raymond is the author of 21 scholarly articles relating to Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and Sri Lanka. She has curated 17 exhibitions of Burmese arts and textiles, including one on Burmese reverse glass paintings and another on tattoos. In addition to Professor Raymond's deep scholarly involvement in Myanmar, she has also taken an active role in assisting migrants from the Karen state in Myanmar who have settled in northern Illinois, where she now lives. She's currently preparing a major exhibit entitled The Art of Surviving, The Journey of the Karen Refugees of Illinois, which will open in the fall of 2020, simultaneously with the next International Burma Studies Conference at Northern Illinois University. She is thus not only a formidable scholar, but a deeply involved humanist as well. And please join me in welcoming Catherine.
Thank you. I'm so sorry for being late, but you know what they said, when you are working in Southeast Asia, and especially on Buddhism, there is no time. It's timeless, as the video will tell you when you are teaching Buddhism. Okay, I have just to recoup and concentrate after speaking about Mohenjo-daro with a taxi driver from Pakistan. Okay, so this is a very interesting subject, which seems to be kind of, okay, this is a story of a Buddha image, which is more or less 1,000 years old, and who I said who, because it's regarding as a very special object for Buddhists in Burma, traveled the world and the saga of his return. When you before arriving there, they were quite 25 years between the time it was looted in one of the temples in Bagan, one of the first royal capital of the Burmese Empire between the 11th and 13th century, and the return in December 2012. Well, it arrived just in the same time as Obama, so it was probably just to welcome here in December, but it was inaugurated when we had the first international welcome by the Burmese authorities, and you have to know that, as Judy mentioned, maybe not completely, she wanted to be a scholar on Burmese music and couldn't be there. So it was quite difficult. So this long saga, for me, as an art historian and an archaeologist, but also strongly advocating against the illicit traffic of antiquity since I started art history as an archaeologist. Usually archaeologists are against looting, art historians not so much because, sorry. So when I inherited of the collection where I am the curator at Northern Illinois University, it was a big problem because I was facing people say, oh, we wanted to give you an object. I said, so tell me more about the story of the object. Do you know the provenance? Okay, so this is what we are going to speak about because it seems to be easy to return an object coming from an unknown place. But first of all, people are maybe not interested in getting it. I mean, why do you want to return the Buddha? It's so complicated. Can you keep it? I said, well, usually when I have something which is not belonging to me, I try to return to the right owner, right? But also, it's not only complicated, but it's what is involved, what is saying, how difficult it is to restitute all the objects which have been looted for centuries into the right owner. Can we do it? How do we prove the provenance? Everything takes a long time and usually money for the court and so on. So here we are in the city, is one of the view from a balloon, in fact, in the city of Bagan, and which is this beautiful city with more than 2,000 ruins, temples, and so on. We are going to talk about this. Along this river, the Irrawaddy River, there was a temple quite far away from the center. And I would like to just address what I did with my student. This is a draft of a paper I have to do for the reader, for the Duke University. And I want to address few points here. So how to best protect their national heritage for criminals. At the end, I'm going to tell the story. But while fighting for the restitution of stolen artworks, and while the level of success within each country has varied, so what has been really the problem facing all these museums? And there is one word: diplomacy. Okay, so this research has been questioning how to protect cultural heritage from the beginning. And in particular for the extended archaeological sites such as Angkor, and everybody who is familiar with Angkor, they know how French Minister of Culture, André Malraux, everybody loves him in France, but École Française d'Extrême-Orient, and I happen to be one of the members years ago, and that was really incredible to have some person, at that time he was not a minister, but looting one of the most beautiful temples outside, of course, of the center of the city. So the same thing happened here. It's during the military junta in the 90s, where it became obvious for the military the way to get access to money was to loot all the temples and have a very interesting network to deal with. One of my colleagues, who is a political scientist, tell me she witnessed military truck taking Buddha images from major sites within Bagan. So I'm going to talk about this temple, which is outside of the center of the site, and which is along the river somewhere, of course, losted, not for everybody, apparently, and where it's quite difficult to get access to. There is a little dirt road which has a lot of fossil, wooden fossil, when you walk along, but it's really accessible by the river. And this site was quite interesting for various reasons. So it's located, so here you have, all of you know where is Bagan. You have to imagine the Irrawaddy River going this way. So the corner of this river is in Bagan. And Bagan, as they said now, Bagan. So here is the old city, and the site, you have Nyan village, but the site is really out of the tourist way of visiting the site, and usually you don't quite know. Today is the investiture of our new president, so I wanted to just put, I cannot be there, but she's here. She's our new first female president at Northern Illinois University, so it was one way I said, well, I cannot be there, but you will be there one way or another. So we visited the site. It's an isolated place, really built up in the rock, in the caves, and Choku Umin, meaning a cave out of the rock. And so my student was doing a study of how the Americans were displaying Burmese Buddhist imagery within the museum in the US, comparing to the way it was done in Burma. So, of course, it's coming from a very special place, and I will talk about it, how these Buddha images, which was already broken by a previous earthquake. There are many earthquakes within the region, and regularly each century has catastrophic earthquake, and one occurred in the 19th century, and of course in 1975. Anyway, so a lot of these Buddha images fell from their niche, and this is probably just one part which was already broken but reinstalled in one of the niche. We don't know if it was here or there after the earthquake in 1975. Anyway, this is important because you are going to see you without your feet, you don't go very far, but same thing for a Buddha image. If you have not the feet, well, you may try to find where it's coming from in looking for the feet. So that's the interior of the temple. And so this is a typical Burmese temples, and where sometimes you have painting or you have niche over. So before going further, I would like to remind you what is really the illicit traffic of antiquity, and why is it our business to take care of it. First of all, as you probably all know, it's a huge market. It's billions and billions of dollars. It goes hand to hand with all kind of traffic, including weapons and terrorism and so on. So the FBI is always very interested. They call me regularly to ask me about such and such provenance. In 1917, UNESCO just had a special law called the 1970 law to protect any antiquity coming outside of the source countries. But the problem is, of course, the implication, and this law was done for two reasons: for protecting any antiquity getting outside of the country, and was addressing part of the problem, not completely, of the restitution. I want to give you some examples. So this was, as I mentioned, the protection, this convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import was really important, because now when you welcome an object in a collection, you need to know if it has been coming to the collector or the donor who wants to give the object before 1970 or not. So usually, this is another part of the problem also. But it's really making a kind of line not to touch what has been coming to the country before 1970s. So in the museum, everybody will ask you, when did this object arrive? So I'm interested about, okay, within this convention, they were part with the restitution and how to work with the International Cooperation Network, for which I have been collaborating within ICOMOS and the various part of the French system. At that time I was a scholar there. I don't think we'll have a time, but I had really a very 2 minutes movie on why the end of trafficking saved the culture as an element of identity. And so, and I don't think you are you connected?
It should be.
We'll see the beginning. Go down, 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 down. This one. Yeah, please. Thank you.
It's a strange little object, isn't it?
So
That
we're talking
bell-shaped
about
body, those big wide
Mesopotamia,
eyes.
former Iraq.
Looks
but
like
it's
something
applying
you might
to
pick up
any
at your local
object.
market, right? But there's a much bigger story here. This little object is called the Eye Idol. It is 5,000 years old and was discovered in Syria. It's an irreplaceable part of the country's cultural heritage. Sadly, the eye idols are only one example of many objects at risk of disappearing completely. While the conflict in the country rages on, the theft of ancient artifacts during illegal excavations becomes easier, and they can be small enough to fit in a piece of hand luggage. Since 2011, 25% of Syria's archaeological sites have been pillaged. Once stolen, they're smuggled into neighbouring countries. Despite these countries' best efforts to fight illegal trafficking, stolen artifacts eventually end up on the antiques market. The increased sale of these artifacts online makes it hard to keep track of them. The good news is, you can help stop this. Before purchasing an antique object, keep an eye out for these red flags. Is there dirt on it? Does it seem like a broken fragment of a larger artifact? Is there a reference number painted on its base that looks like it's from a museum? Does its price seem too good to be true? And most importantly, can the seller provide you with the object's provenance paperwork?
That you can always
If you
create.
feel suspicious about the object, you should alert the police, customs, museums and culture ministries, or UNESCO. Syria is home to some of humanity's oldest and most valuable cultural wonders. The looting of artifacts threatens the country's rich cultural identity. Help us put an end to this illicit trafficking. For more information on this, please visit this link.
Okay, so that gives you two elements I wanted to talk about regarding the return of this precious Buddha image, because the provenance was part of the question of returning the Buddha image. Within the scope of Southeast Asia, because you are all Southeast Asianists or interested in Southeast Asia, there have been a huge fight since the 2000, I will say, and the stolen Buddha image was one of the first cases where Myanmar, through, well, at that time Burma, before 1989, it was called Burma from the British spelling, was really the first one to engage on the name of the country a fight to restitute the object. So then my friends who were working on the Cambodian site had listed on catalogs established by École Française d'Extrême-Orient list of objects which were stolen. But he also discovered that there were this catalog with a price close to the object the dealers had in front of the object. Meanwhile, he had the catalog, the former catalog of EFAO. So it's always a real problem to return, and it has been going on for a long time. The roads of the trade are, of course, from India or Southeast Asia to Hong Kong and Singapore. Singapore was a big market for that, and still is, not for Burma in particular, but regularly I see stela from Cambodia with inscriptions. Nobody can read it but the specialist, and for sale on eBay and so on. It goes through various routes. The simple route is, of course, London. Zurich is a golden plate. You can recreate an ID for any object you want, and then it's up to the market. I discussed with a collector in Chicago who had a wonderful collection of Islamic objects, which the way to validate a collection is to have one of the big museums, like the Art Institute, having an exhibition with a catalog written by a specialist. And then you validate all this trafficking. Coming from, and she told me, she said, oh, you know, the Swiss people, the art dealers, they don't like to deal with museum because it's too complicated. There's too many documents. It's easier with private money. So we get it very easily. Anyway, so it goes to New York or San Francisco, as we are going to see. That was one of the aspects for which they were really concerned a few years ago. I'm not going there with the antiquity and the terrorist act and in the whole area. We can talk about later if you want. Since the 2010, there have been really big concern because, of course, with the internet platform, people knows where objects are and eventually they can recognize objects which have been stolen. So there have been few restitution of major artifacts for art historians which are unique in the country, and such as Iraq. And these are for those who have been studying Middle East and Ur, Assur, and all these Mesopotamia. And these objects were looted and fortunately partly restored, partly destroyed. So it goes everywhere, and you see Germany, you see France, you see England there, and of course the US. But before going directly to the West, it goes through various directions, and it's not always easy to retrace the steps. One of the very important elements is also the diplomatic aspect. And in fact, it's a big buzz. They choose to one object within the collection. For example, if the Getty or the Met will choose one object, you can be sure they don't choose one of the major objects in their collection, which attract, of course, the visitors. So it's a huge battle because, of course, this beautiful Indian coming from Khajuraho was, of course, restituted in 2015, but there are quite a few others in the museum. Same thing in Cambodia, where, of course, the Prime Minister and the various museums and the US Embassy are very proud of celebrating the return. But what is behind that? When I came in 2004 for doing, well, I came in 2002, but the first exhibition was in 2004, I discovered this beautiful Buddha image in the collection, in a crate, attached with chains, not knowing exactly what it was. Catalog is, I'm finishing the catalog right now, so I knew there was a story about this Buddha, but Richard, my dear colleague and predecessor who created the Center for Burma Studies in 1986, was not around. So I did the exhibition entitled The World of Burmese Buddhism, because I didn't know the collection. So I thought, well, everything seems to be Buddhist in this collection for good reason. And so I exhibited this piece, and the trustees said, oh, 2002, as we are going to see, the case took place in 1995. It was not returned yet. And I exhibited, and they said, it was not returned? We thought it was already back. Well, what happened? Well, I took this opportunity of the reaction of the Burma Studies Foundation member to just add something. First of all, if you read here, is property of the Union of Myanmar, one. Second, it's on our website, is one of the first exhibition I did, so you have it here. And the temporary custody of Northern Illinois University. With this simple phrase, being French, not only because I am from there, but UNESCO is based in Paris. Any member of any embassy in Paris are member of UNESCO. That means for me, being not American, but being French, knowing the UNESCO system, knowing the Burmese embassy quite well, I was able, so this took place in 2004, and then we had another in Chicago in 2005. In 2006, this website was done, and I went to the embassy every 6 months and said, I have a Buddha which is belonging to you will be wonderful for merit making if you can return. I can return to UNESCO under your protection, and you can return and get the merit of it. I don't want the university name. I don't want my name at all in this deal. Well, 2006, if you know a little bit the Burmese history, it was just a year before the Saffron Revolution in 2007. It was 2 years before the tsunami Nargi, the cyclone. And so every time I was contacting a new ambassador, a new rules, and so on. And finally, so here you see few of the view of the temples and where it's coming from. It's a beautiful image, as you can see, and I will come back on it because it's quite interesting. I was able to enter in 2011 into a conversation, a real conversation, with His Excellency Uchozo Min, for which I stayed in close touch. Now he's a Burmese ambassador in London, and he was essential in calling Naypyidaw and getting the money necessary to repatriate the Buddha image from Paris to Burma. Okay, so if we look at the trajectory of this Buddha, who traveled the world, as you can see, started from Bagan, was looted under the time a big turmoil, which was the student unrest in 1988. So the borders were just like widely open for any kind of trafficking, especially antiquities, and during that time, many objects disappeared from Burma. Most of them have been recovered in a way. Some of them are still in this country, in different museums. I have seen them. I promise not to say anything, so I'm not going to tell anything, but I know there are artifacts which are here. So it went, it was stolen by an unknown group who had probably a truck, a boat, and a network to go to Thailand. The Mr. Diran, an art dealer, how you said crooked? Crooked. He didn't like the word when I put it in an article, but saw it in Bangkok and saw an opportunity in 1990s to buy it and make profit. Like I said, it was broken in the little clip, and the price was probably very low. It traveled to Singapore, then it went to San Francisco where he had his practice. He had already quite a few problems with police at that time. He put it on for sale in New York at Sotheby's in fall 1991 when the FBI impounded it. After an anonymous, what I know is somebody from the Met, called and said, this Buddha has been stolen from Bagan. Because it was in one of the great books, the Old Burma Early Bagan, for those who know, the bibliography of the archaeology of Burma. And so it was listed as one of the very important Buddha image from one of the temples, Choku Umin. So this is where I'm going to concentrate, how it went from New York being impounded by the FBI, staying, going to the court, trying to find the owner of the piece. Nobody claimed anything. And finally, my my predecessor, Professor Kuller, who is here, was contacted by the case of the court and saying, can you give us more detail about this statue? He has been, in his youth, in 1974 for a year in Bagan. And because of this, he knew the site very well. He knew Pierre Pichard from École Française d'Extrême-Orient, who is an architect who did a number of volumes on the inventory of Bagan. He knew he had seen this Buddha somewhere. And because of that, he was able to question why this image is so important, to do the research not only on the iconography, the representation of this image, but also trying to find some kind of proof. You cannot restitute any object, even with a photo, if you have no proof it belongs to the site. Unfortunately, this statue didn't have feet. The feet were somewhere. And he knew very well the archaeology department. So Wang Chai, who was at that time the director of the archaeology department, mentioned to him that after the looting of all the Buddha images of this site, where there were 5 major Buddha images, they just got every single Buddha images to the museum, to the storage. And due to that, he was able to ask Wang Chai, did you know if you find the feet somewhere? And here they are. So with this in mind and a long report describing the importance of the image, which is in part due to the rare standing Buddha image displaying this simple gesture of the Dharma chakra mudra, Dharma the law, chakra the wheel, the hand gesture, which is usually associated with the Buddha and the first sermon, but usually the Buddha image is seated and not standing. Only in Bagan, Professor Kuller found 11 of them, and they all dated from the third king, King Chanzita, who was one of the builder, or the main builder of the early period in Bagan. And so that was really a national treasure. Today, you can see in the Ananda temple 2 of these old ones. These ones were not in the same style. You can see the difference on style. This is Mandalay 19th century, and this is more Ava 17th, 18th century. You can see, first of all, the hand gesture are different, and the statue itself is completely different, and they are in wood. And you can see the same representation here in these 2 directions, north and south. So the turning in motion of the wheel of law, indicating of the first sermon, was really important. It was one of the 11s. And we assume it's maybe even one of the small sketch, because it's a small statue. And it probably preceded, although the inscription in Chokum in stone on the site is from the 13th century. I think it is revealing that the temple was built in the 13th century, but the caves for meditation, and I think, the cave, they are a very complex network of corridor behind the statue where you can meditate. And we can assume that they were forest monks meditating in not too far, but far away from the main royal city of Bagan in these caves. Not only monks, but maybe devotees. So it was probably built in different phases. And this Buddha image you see here was exactly displaying the same type. The hand gesture for Dharma Chakra Mudra, if you look at Huntington, you have different ways in India and all over Asia to display this type of representation. But this type of hand gesture was typical of this period. This is His Excellency, Ujio Swamin. So before arriving there, as we declared that it was a national treasure, to thank Professor Cooler after one of his students, who was a lawyer, defended pro bono and got the permission from the Burmese department, the Burmese Ministry of Culture and the embassy to defend the case on the name of Myanmar. That was an exception. They offered the possibility to Dr. Cooler to exhibit for 1 year. But he stayed, as I mentioned, a little bit longer, a time to get a PhD, I guess. But anyway, so he was the one who really was instrumental in the return. Every single time, people were telling me, why you are not keeping it? Why you are not keeping it? It's really complex, you know, to return. But we insisted, and he had a good occasion to welcome the statue. Every Friday on my agenda, I called the embassy. I called the emissary, a Burmese who is living not far from here, not far from Detroit, Upalita, and said, hey, so what about the statue? Can we return it? So he took the statue with the aim of returning it, but meanwhile, for a few months, he thought the cost was too high to ship it to Paris. He kept it in his home and raised $2,000 from devotees coming to his place. And this money was offered during the ceremony because he wanted to pay homage to this very powerful, I mean, you can feel it when you arrive on this statue. This statue is beautifully made, but also charged by 1,000 years of history. So it went to Paris finally, but I put the threat on them and I said, is the place secured? Are you sure there is no problem, and so on. So the day after the inauguration of one of the exhibitions, he's an artist too, that's why probably he really was behind. The Buddha was returned in the archaeology department in Yangon. I had been in contact with the museum, the National Museum in Yangon, for 3 years prior that, saying the Buddha will be returned, I don't know when, but be ready. Same thing in Bagan. Every time they were saying, what do you think? Do you think it's okay to send it back to Yangon Museum? And I said, well, you ask me, I will say it should go back to Bagan, but it's your heritage, it's not my decision. Every single Friday I had exactly the same type, saying they made their mind to have it in the museum. This is the ceremony with Upalita, who was the emissary, that's the Ministry of Culture, and all these people I have known at one point in my life as a student. And so it was a huge brouhaha. I didn't know. I mean, they said, oh, so do you want a ceremony? I said, not really. I mean, it's okay. You want? Okay, fine. I'm there. I have 1 hour. And so, but here, in fact, all these people there, they were interested because they were from the State Department and from IIEE, which is the higher education working with the State Department. I mean, that was my colleague from Arizona State University. So a lot of people had an interest in building up these big things. Upalita had an interest, and he was the one who tried to have the minister and said, oh, you should call the ambassador for the ambassador. And I said, I'm not a US citizen. I'm not going to call the US ambassador. I can call the French ambassador, but not the... So it was like, okay. So the big deal was I got a certificate of donation of things which was not belonging to me that day. And it went through different periods of exhibition. All the Buddha from the 8th century to 19th century was lined up. Then it was singled out in 2014. when the princess of Thailand came and was mentioning the fact it was really singled out. And here now is in a kind of very glamorous museum setting in 2016 with this little explanation which has some wrong facts in it, but I said, okay, here is a real text, here is the money for making a new board, and here maybe you should fix it. It didn't change. This is Burma, so things are changing a little bit, but you do one step and then two back and forth. Anyway, so one of the questions is, I ask my students is, well, where does the Choco Umin Buddha belongs now that it has been returned to Burma? And I was asking, okay, do you think it should have been displayed in Yang-U, I mean in Bagan, where you can see, and why are you not keeping it? I mean, these are questions I think we can just question ourselves when we are returning objects and facing this kind of, oh, why are you going in so much trouble to return the image? The question is for you. So I try to be on time.
Well, thank you very much. And any questions?
Yeah.
The question, as you put it, is really fascinating because so often the operative question is, why return it when it's safer here?
Safer, yes, that's what they said about Berlin's museum before it was bombed.
Yeah.
And all the Chinese mural paintings, manuscript and documents were gone. So, yes, safer for whom and when?
I didn't mean to suggest that was my question.
No, but it's a real question. I mean, there are so many questions.
They're asking it forever in London.
Yes.
But the associated question here may be with Sotheby's in New York and London, such key points in all of these processes.
That's why they are very careful now.
You know.
About making sure what is going to their catalog.
And this should be very useful in terms of their stake in credibility for the whole market.
Yeah.
So did they work as well as you would hope in this case?
Well, they were the one who just withdrew the object from the sale in 1991. So they are aware of their reputation as well, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could just lay out a bit more clearly the landscape of the different perspectives of Burmese about the question, and then who's behind these perspectives and why, right? About A, should it be returned, and B, if it is returned, where should it be situated? If you could just sort of lay that out, a diversity of thoughts.
Yeah, and in fact, the article we are writing, I asked the editor to bring on board my friend from the National Museum, because I wanted her to tell the story from the Burmese side, saying, we received this image. There is a little article in December saying, we received this article, we don't quite know where it's coming from. Just like that, it arrived at our door and we don't know what to do with that before people in the museum. So I think the first question from the Burmese side, you had to do the scholarship before to prove that it is a national treasure. Without the work done by Professor Kuhler and and his research in trying to validate the importance of this image. I don't think there are thousands of Buddha images, so why this one? So that was the first question. And every time the Burmese telling me, why do you want to return it? There are plenty of Buddha images in Burma. That's really every single time. So that was really, you have to really defend the case for them, for their patrimony, until you reinforce the idea of patrimony in the country. And now with the World Heritage Site, nothing is perfect, right? But with the UNESCO Heritage Site of the Pew, you started having discourse and discussion about protecting their patrimony with the mass tourism arriving in the country since 1990s. And they see that they have nothing to show. They had to come, the first exhibition in New York in 2015 was borrowing object from our collection and asking me, how did you get that? We don't have that in Burma. That's what the curators visiting exhibition, when I invite them, they always said, how did you get that? I said, well, it's only donation from Americans who went to Burma after the independence to help rebuilding your country at the time. They were not really antique. So they were just getting whatever, and they knew the value, they valued the art, and they had plenty of money and empty big houses. Empty. They were renting big houses because they had plenty of money. So I call that the jeep trade. They were connected with people who were going from houses to houses to houses. I saw that when I was a student in Yangon University. If you were going to a diplomat house, they were always antique dealer knocking at the door. Oh, do you want this? No, I prefer a reclining Buddha. Of course, they didn't know how to call them. They called them with all kind of names. Oh, okay, I see what you mean. I will bring you that next week. So you have to start working within Burma and to make sure they get this education and they can start really defending their own patrimony. But before that, during these years, you know, they barely survived wherever they were, and they couldn't really see the big picture. So the attitude right now, the change of the museum, I have seen the National Museum, has been, first of all, they have two national museums, which is one the exception of Myanmar amongst many. One in Naypyidaw and one in Yangon. So since 1990s, they got this huge hotel, not at all a museum, not conceived from a museum in Yangon, and they really started really doing a national museum. That was one. But after 2000, they really started traveling within Asia and saw different museology and different pedagogy, and started a little program out of the Yangon Museum. So they have a better idea. So also, Burmese have been traveling a lot, and in traveling a lot, the question you ask about from the Ministry of Culture became more and more important. So they feel now the importance and the pride. And unfortunately, right now, Buddhism is really on the top of their list. And chasing away the diversity which existed in Burma before. So, so the last part of your question is, yeah, more and more. They ask me several times to have something on heritage. I'm working with Burmese students in University of Mandalay and Yadanabong. Eventually, sometime I give lecture also in Rangoon about the importance of their own patrimony. Yeah, yeah, Alison.
small part to play in the return of the Italian objects from the Getty Villa.
Oh, yeah.
I was an intern there at the time, so I had to move the labels over, but they took everything out. So I think of that case because that one's very famous in this country, and I guess the big difference is Italy came and said we want this stuff back, and you are taking a more preemptive tactic. And do you think that that's becoming more common because curators and museums will be caught ignorantly holding something that then later on is, then it tarnishes the scholar's reputation or the institution's reputation to be caught having something that has been thought to be stolen.
They know what has been stolen.
Getting rid of stuff now.
Yeah. The looting has been starting in 19th century in Bagan with a German case, very famous to have cut by squares choku in Bagan, and destroyed in part during the bombing of Berlin. And in Laos, so whenever a German, any German, you can be like 20 years old German student, if you don't know the story, you go to Bagan, oh, you are German, a certain Thomas really stole or painting from the wall, look, here are the big square, and they wanted to continue here and there, and they will tell you. If you go to Laos, they will tell you about another case, the Emerald Buddha, which went now to Thailand, and they are still crying and saying, well, the Buddha is crying because it's not his homeland. Well, the story is a little bit more complex, but it's intra. But they know exactly the patrimony. They feel it when some big case like that occurred. So for Buddha image is more important, but Emerald Buddha was, the palladium of the kingdom, whatever principalities he did circulate. But for this, now I think it's just moving toward more being upfront, and now they want everything. And then you have to explain how difficult it is to restitute, not only to find the right channel, but to demonstrate where it's coming from. So the importance of the protection is documentation. And so this is the first step. You have to make sure they know, and the context where it's belonging. So you have to really prove where it's coming from. So to be able to prove where it's coming from, you need to just document to the object on site. And when you have a small object, like at the beginning I was showing you into the video clip, it's really difficult, even if it's very rare, because it has a Sanskrit inscription on the amber, in the ring. It's just very, very complex. You can just put that, in your pocket and say, nobody can see it. Yeah.
I saw the picture, but I didn't catch quite how did you find the feet?
Oh, the feet was really an adventure, because I didn't know they were going to bring the feet. Okay, here was the first delegation dealing with the Ministry of Higher Education in Burma, official to official. There were 10 selected. We went to Burma, and we were having a very full week, and I said, I can be there on Sunday. I have nothing in my agenda from 2 to 5, so we can do a ceremony during that time. I had a meeting with them at the museum where I said, so how big it will be the crowd? And I said, 5, 6. Didn't know it was going to be a big event. And then this emissary, Upadeta, just alert the ministry and the minister. And so when they knew the minister was coming, they flew the feet from Bagan to Rangoon the day of the ceremony. And I was still saying, phew, they said the minister is coming, he's not. I was like, I have worked in Burma for so long. I just like, I'm ready for everything. It's just, oh, the minister is not coming. It's okay. So we can do without. Anyway, so what happened is, knowing the minister was coming, they were all the medias. And so suddenly, I arrived in a room full of people with all the journalists asking me all kinds of questions. And somebody took me apart and said, did you see? We have the feet. And I said, I became livid. I said, if it's not the lower part, what I'm going to say? I don't know. I'm not sure it is the same. I've never seen them together. And it was really, I just feel, I mean, I'm white, but I was very white that day. I was like, oh gosh. And then I looked at very carefully, and I was not smiling at all. And there were journalists following me and seeing my face completely like. And so they did take the feet from Bagan. They could have just done the reverse, you know. So then they restore it, not in a very nice way. In fact, you can see here how beautiful is a restoration. It's a construction epoxy. So, in fact, I have a photo with my students and taking all kind of photo, and I said, oh no, okay. But anyway, so this was fitting perfectly, right? Good for us, because it would have been an embarrassment. Yeah, with very authentic paintings and beautiful carving on the side. It's, yeah.
Yes, I have a beautiful wooden Buddha about this big. That I lived in Taunji for 3 years, and we were out in the jungle just traveling around, and in this old fallen down temple, and we were just walking around, just, you know, and found this Buddha on the ground. And it seemed like that wasn't a very good place for it. So we picked it up, and we didn't know what to do. This is my husband and I, and on the way, we picked it back to Taunji. We picked up a monk who was hitchhiking, and we picked up a monk, and we said, what should we do with, you know, what should we do? And he says, you give me a ride to Taunji and you can have it. And
yeah, you can have it. Look, it's broken. We don't want, and in fact,
I still
yeah.
have it, and now what do I do? I mean, I still have it.
Yeah. Well, I knew the time will be short, so I didn't put it. I don't know if. Okay, so here is the situation. I didn't put it. I knew I had something. Okay, so there are two possibilities which happen here. It's either it's a natural cause or it's looted. But a lot of the time it's discarded because it's broken. It's unauspicious. So because it's unauspicious, you don't want to have it in a monastery, and you don't want to keep it at home. So if the foreigners want it, and if they just give a donation to the temple to restore the temple, they can have everything. So a lot of these images left on the side, they are not always object of looting. They can be just sources of, you know, abandon or somewhere. I will say you have it. You didn't put it in your bathroom or in an auspicious. Sorry, but that's.
Yeah, no, it is.
I have a class.
It is a very It is in a very respectful. It is in the highest part of the house.
Exactly, and so I think it's also one thing to said right now. You got it. You know where it was, and so on. I think for the time being, I think you did a good job for the Buddha.
But you know, I'm not going to be around that. What's going to happen to it after I?
Well, that's, you have to decide it, where do you want to
that's
go,
what I'm
and
asking.
that's the last part of the question for curators and donors is, how many Buddha images do you want in your collection? Well, usually that's my last question, but I'm saying that to my students. So for me, the importance of knowing that the image, which is usually an image which has been the source of devotion, should be respected in any culture. So if it's not misplaced and so on, and you describe the way you found it and how you had it to have it in your luggage, that was when?
When? 1960.
You are before the 1970, so you are fine. Just to sleep okay tonight. But I remembered in Paris, people were like, oh yeah, I know you are coming to our house, but you know the things, and so starting a huge discourse because they were concerned I was going to have a long speech.
I have a question about that UNESCO convention.
Yes.
Is the date 1970 an arbitrary date that it ratifies all of the looting before it to be okay, then you don't?
It doesn't ratify to be okay, but it was a date when they started because they needed to start at a certain time the convention. It doesn't ratify the looting previously, but there are objects which have been looted. I'm going to give you the example of bronze Khmer. They were looted by the Thai in the 14th century. They went to Ayutthaya. The Burmese, the Mon in Burma, looted Ayutthaya. It went to Pego. From Pego, the Arakanese, you located the geography, it went to Mro'u in Arakan, Myoang in Arakan. When the Burmese annexed the former kingdom of Arakan, it went to Mandalay, to the Mahamuni at that time Amarapura. It is still there. The only bronze from the 14th century which survive from Angkor are in Burma. To whom you restitute this within the chain. You have more complex images. Kuno, make an example. I'm not a friend of Kuno, but he was the former curator at the Art Institute, and he demonstrated that Byzantine and Christian objects traveling from various parts of Middle East to Europe and then coming here, but in between it went to so many hands to whom are belonging these antiquities, and that's the title of his one of his book. I recommend to my students to read, but not to follow.
Well, I mean, in the media, there's this famous case of the Elgin marbles.
Yep.
The British Museum. And the Greek government wants it back, but the British clearly don't want to give it back. So
But this is a big...
how are you going to arbitrate that?
Well, that's a big case. I think, as someone was mentioning, they are usually proactive. I think, Alison, you were mentioning that they are proactive in asking. It should be restituted, honestly. But for any case, we, public, can say whatever we want. At the end, the lawyer just got... That's the thing. It's money, lawyers, and all these various cases which are from the international platform to defend. And the British they have no right to keep it, but it's also attracting a lot of visitors at the British Museum.
They could claim that it's universal value.
But there will be no museum in Europe. I mean, look at Guimet. Guimet is full of Cambodian stuff. which came at the beginning. Musée, the Asian Art Museum in Paris, Musée Guimet, was created for the Khmer, the Khmer collection. So in fact, the Cambodian have been working very closely to the French, and the French have been, so they didn't reclaim anything. But the French have been, I think, giving back a certain number of things without saying too much, because the case of Malraux was like deeply, deeply there. You know, Bante Shrai, everything from Bante Shrai, this little temple from the 12th century, which is really a beautiful, exquisite temple. But it was not the only one. It was Coquer. I mean, all the objects you saw at one point was from Coquer. They are now in the former Musée Blanchard de la Brosse in former Saigo in Ho Chi Minh City, where they were stopped because at that time it was easy to control. The traffic of antiquity was taking the Mekong to go back, so it was easy to control. Now, did you see how it can go to different places? And so then at one point, oh, where are you coming from? Hong Kong? Oh, it's okay. So nobody's going to check if it's a Burmese or whatever statue. And people told me when I interviewed them for illicit traffic of antiquity, they now put Chinese when it's Burmese. So it's complex.
How extensive has the looting been in the Bagan era area?
In the Bagan area, extensively. Now a lot of things are in the museum, and they had the copies in the museum, most of them. So you don't really see a statue which can be taken away in the beside Ananda, the major temples within Bagan. Yeah, it was extensive. Now, after 90s, when the military, the SLORC at that time, took power, they were really a military network helping them to really get objects out. And there were also people copying and making this beautiful copy, completely reinvented the iconography and selling that to museums for thousands of dollars. So it was like an embarrassment for the art historian, I'm not going to give the name, who sold that to Singapore, to Australia, because in the 90s, Australia and Singapore didn't have the same law, and they bought it extensively, collection from Burma at all levels. And so now, so they protected at the airport. They will ask you to open the bag and so on. But if you take the road or the river, you know, if you have a four-wheel drive, you can really pass all the various small routes where they are. I mean, in Bangladesh, I remembered just going following where the object was coming, and it was pretty dangerous, but I was a young student and didn't care. I said, so I pretended I wanted to buy what they call black stone, and in fact it was stela of beautiful Pala images from, you know, Pala is a Buddhist dynasty between the 9th and the 12th century. And so I was pretending I was, and I went to all kind of places, but they were just paying the police.
So you may have gone over this, but how did Northern Illinois University come across, how did they get it, the statue?
Oh, this statue is because Professor Kuller was the one who really started with his students defending the peace on behalf of the Burmese government, which allowed them to do it. And
but
so,
but the university owned
so
it.
the university got it for 1 year of exhibition.
Oh, okay.
And then because it was so complex to return it, because there was no really relationship between the US and Myanmar, where for me, being French, it was easy. I saw immediately I wanted to return these. But then I realized many things. I realized I didn't want to have bad publicity for the university because I could see the headline of a newspaper, "Stolen Buddha at NIU is returned to Burma." Thank you very much, but no. So there were a lot of things I was asking in the legal department. They had to make a kind of, I had to go through legal to make sure returning the Buddha, we were not in charge anymore. And anything happening to the Buddha after it was leaving the campus was not anymore our problem. Well, it was my problem because the emissary wanted to return himself at a lower cost, and he kept the Buddha image for two months. That's why I was giving a call on a regular basis every Friday at 2 o'clock. I'm going to give a call to Padeta. How are you, sir? So it was a long process from 2006 to 2012. It was not in a summer, but every week I was just, I wanted to know how the statue was doing, to make sure. Because the problem for us, hearing what I told that, why are you not keeping it? I was like worried about going back to the market. You know, I mean, it's just like, so you have to just put the pressure and to make sure, okay, they know this is a very special object and that should be returned to the country. So, yeah.
But this case, it is because you could make a case that it is a special object. But what if the less special ones, then nobody wants them, then what do you do?
So there have been amendment to the 1970s and to protect even more and the more the material culture. Because like you said, I mean, what about lacquer? What about wooden object? What about a non-religious object and so on? And so I think there is a big push to entitle the various countries and showing how important they have to protect their own patrimony. So yeah, it's a very difficult. This case is interesting because it lasted so long. So during this long travel and long journey, anybody could have just dropped the ball and say, okay, I'm done. I just don't want anymore. But for me, because like I said, with my training as an archaeologist, I'm not working for me. I have no pleasure. In fact, people are always telling me, oh, we go to your house and there is nothing ancient. I said, well, I'm not a collector, I'm a curator, please. And yes, so just like, no. I have modern painting from Burma and things like that. I bought it officially from the artist. I mean, just like, but no, I have when thousands of people can see it, what is the interest of having in a private place? Most of the time, especially antiquity. But it's a very difficult subject. And fortunately, there are a lot of laws to prevent. So I think the prevention started here. I remember discussing with the US ambassador in Laos, where I was posted for a while. And I said, look, did you ever see a head of a Christ in any Christian house? I said, it's the same thing for the Buddha heads. That was Malraux and all of them who started in the early 20th century to just promote these antiquities and this illicit traffic of antiquity. Then it went to the upper end market, and you saw Buddha images, especially Burmese Buddha images, in a very luxurious home in the art and decor or whatever magazine exists in this country about style and very wealthy houses. And so people want to become a member of this prestigious club in collecting these rare antiquities where they don't know anything. They call you and said, "What do you know about that?" I said, "Well, excuse me, who are you?" Usually this is kind of things I receive. "Oh, what do you know? Can you tell me how much it's?" No, I'm sorry, I'm not a qualified person to tell you how much is the value of this statue. I can tell you what it is. Who you are, it will be important for me, but.
Okay, unfortunately we are out of time, but if you would like to talk to Dr. Raymond after, please feel free to do so. I'd like to thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.